Peace is a lie. There is only passion. Through passion, I gain strength. Through strength, I gain power. Through power, I gain victory. Through victory, my chains are broken. The Force shall set me free. That is the code of the Sith, and before the Rule of Two, the Sith, like the Jedi, had their own order where they trained Force-sensitive recruits. And while we may know a lot about Jedi training with their Padawans and younglings, what did Sith training look like for their apprentices? But first, let's clear some things up. Unlike the Jedi, not all Sith recruits were taken from birth like the Jedi did, and instead, many went to the Sith academies to be trained in the dark side. But there are a few instances of children being trained from birth. So what did Sith training look like? Before Sith could even begin training in the dark side, they first needed to prove themselves to the Order, and that was by gaining prestige as well as getting a sponsorship from the Sith. The way they would gain a sponsorship from a Sith was by proving themselves in the dark side, and they also had a few ways they could go about gaining prestige, two of which included impressing a Sith master and killing any competition. And in fact, killing their fellow Darksider was allowed and kinda looked up upon. But that was only the case if the Sith master did not find out. The reason the Sith wanted the Darksiders to kill each other was because they wanted to weed out the weak and only wanted the strong to prevail. This taught the Sith how to be sneaky and discreet. It also helped them to hone in their fighting capabilities. And as I've mentioned, you also needed a Sith sponsor to get into the Sith academies. And if you had one, you had a major target on your back due to many gunning for your very position. But these requirements were later changed as time went on and soon were open to anyone who wished to be trained in the dark side. And by some miracle an acolyte was able to pass those trials, they would be put into a class of 4 to 20 students. And from then on, the training would be far more competitive and dangerous than just getting in. In those classes, students constantly sabotaged each other and did whatever was necessary to gain the recognition and favor of their Sith master. And often, this would result in the death of many weak Sith. The strong and talented Sith who impressed their master were often rewarded and gained favor with them, and the weak ones who failed were often punished. Most of the time that meant torture or worse. Some of the skills that they were taught in these classes included combat training, learning many applications of the Force, interrogation, as well as assassination. The students in these classes were also all forced to participate in a ritual known as the sacrifice, which meant they had to take the life of someone who was very close to them or held great importance to them. Some very important aspects of training for the Sith was combat and learning how to harness their emotions. For the Sith, combat was easily one of the most important aspects of anything, because that is how the Sith gained respect from each other. It showed their dominance over other Sith. If they lost in battle, it was seen as weak and dishonorable. As Palpatine stated, no true Sith should ever surrender. This way of thinking led many Sith trainees to kill their fellow Sith to weed out the weak as well as making themselves stronger. After all of this, if they were still alive and completed their training, they would be taken and made a Sith. One major dark side ability they were taught was Force Cloak or Force Deception. This was because the Sith were always on the move and needed to conceal their identity from the Jedi. While this was a basic overview of what Sith training looked like for an apprentice, what happened afterward depended on what temple they were from. If they were from the Temple of Hanagur, they were trained as Sith Marauders. If they were from the Temple of Umbara, they were trained as Sith Assassins. And for the lucky ones that were trained on Korriban, that trained the most gifted of the Sith, they were trained to become the Sith Lords. And their training once in one of these temples consisted of in the morning having intense lightsaber duels with blunt poisonous swords against the Blade Master who made sure they perfected their fighting style. And at the end of this class would choose and fight someone and not stop until one of them was defeated. And later in the day, typically in the afternoon, they would be taught how to use the Force, more specifically how to use their hatred and use dark side abilities. And in typical Sith fashion, they would use these new abilities on each other. And if they were injured, they'd be sent to the medical bay. But if they're sent there, they would be viewed as lesser and weak. And if the Sith had any free time after this, they were allowed to free roam, but often spent much of their time practicing their abilities. For many Sith, they trained with their master alongside other Sith, but for the students at the top of the class, they had the luxury of having one-on-one sessions with their master, which often was much harder than typical training, but gifted them much more knowledge and skills than other Sith. And if a Sith apprentice wanted to rank up, all they had to do was kill their master, as is the way of the Sith. And that is what Sith training looked like for the Sith apprentice before the Rule of Two. Thank you John Diesel9 for giving me this awesome video idea. What are your thoughts on this topic? Did this Sith training make them stronger or did it ultimately make them weaker? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to like and subscribe. And with that, my fellow Star Wars nerds, may the Force be with you.